The night air trembles with the roar of cannons. The walls of Constantinople once thought unbreakable shudder with every strike. You clutch your infant daughter, her soft cries barely audible beneath the thunder outside. Only 3 days have passed since your husband fell on their ramparts. You can still see his face in your mind smeared with dust, eyes burning with defiance before he disappeared into the chaos. Now, footsteps echo up the stairwell. You press your child close and pray. Whatever fate waits beyond that door may make his death seem merciful. Before we go deeper, if you find power in learning the hidden truths buried in history's shadows, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Because what follows is not a tale of conquest alone. It's the story of what happens when an empire rises over the bones of the broken. For nearly 600 years, the Ottoman Empire stretched across continents like a living storm. Its banners flying over deserts, mountains, and seas. The world remembers its beauty, the shimmering domes of the Blue Mosque, the precision of its armies, the brilliance of its rulers. But behind that glory, hidden beneath layers of silk and ceremony, lies the darker pools, the story of the enslaved. When Sultan Mehmed II finally breached the ancient defenses on May 29, 1453, the world changed. The city that had stood for over 1,000 years, the heart of Byzantium, was shattered in a single dawn. After victory, Mehmed reportedly allowed his soldiers a brief window to plunder the fallen city, as was custom in medieval warfare. What followed was chaos that blurred the lines between triumph and tragedy. Church bells that had once called the faithful to prayer now tolled in despair. Doors were smashed open, families torn apart. Thousands were captured, men, women, children herded into the streets like livestock. Some were ransomed, others enslaved. The chronicles disagree on numbers. Some say 10,000, others 50, but all agree on one truth. Constantinople fell not only to cannon fire, but to hunger, greed, and human desperation. Eyewitness accounts describe the squares filled with captives being sorted under the open skymen to one side, women and children to the other. The strong were bound for labor, the young and beautiful for something worse. Venetian sailors later wrote of ships leaving the Golden Horn, their decks heavy with chained passengers, heading toward Bursa, Bedun, and beyond. Even among the victors, there were whispers of unease. Some Ottoman officials recorded the captives as taxable property, and later registers prove that the people of Constantinople were absorbed into the empire's existing trade systems. Human lives entered ledgers beside bolts of silk and sacks of grain. Women, especially the young, were prized most. Some were ransomed to wealthy families, others sold into concubinage or domestic service. Rumors spread of soldiers marking captives with numbers, valuing them like cattle. Historians remain cautious. No Ottoman document confirms such procedures. But the image lingers. A city reduced to a marketplace of souls. Children, too, were swept up in the aftermath. Boys of strong build or bright mind were separated for the Devshirme system, taken to be trained as soldiers or administrators in service of the Sultan. Girls were more often absorbed into homes, serving masters or becoming wives and concubines, far from the lands they once called home. Some stories claim infants were torn from their mothers to silence resistance. These tales, passed through generations of lament and prayer, may never be fully verified, but they reveal a truth deeper than evidence terra, leaves its mark not only on bodies, but on memory. The sack of Constantinople was not merely about walls. Collapsing it was about people disappearing. For those left behind, life became a series of calculations. Hide, flee, or bargain. Entire families vanished onto ships bound for Anatolia. Others hid among the ruins, hoping to be mistaken for the dead. Merchants, priests, and soldiers alike turned human misery into profit. Surviving Ottoman account books from later years record sales of Greek female, 18 years a boy, strong-bodied names reduced to commodities listed beside pepper and wine. The ledgers don't name the siege, but their ink carries its shadow. Over time, the horror became its own weapon. Rumors of Ottoman cruelty spread faster than the armies themselves. Entire towns surrendered at the mere whisper of what had happened in Constantinople. Whether exaggerated or not, the reputation of terror allowed the empire to grow without lifting a sword. Yet behind every legend lies a kernel of pain. The stories of 1453 speak not of organized evil, but of human systems turning suffering into order. To the Ottomans, as to their Byzantine and Mongol predecessors, slavery was not chaos, it was structure, a currency of empire. But for the captured mother on that trembling night, the one clutching her child, his boots echoed closer the empire's glory meant nothing. For her, conquest was not victory or strategy. It was the sound of splintering wood, the smell of smoke, the cry of her baby swallowed by the noise of men at war. Because history remembers emperors and battles, but it forgets the women who bled in silence, the ones who prayed as their homes burned, the ones who vanished across the sea, leaving only songs of lament behind. What the records don't show are the hearts that broke quietly when the walls of Constantinople finally fell. The ships groaned under the weight of chains and sorrow. In the fading light of evening, Constantinople, as harbor once, filled with merchant sails and shimmering mosaics, had turned into a port of human cargo. The cries of the captured rose like a lament over the water, echoing between the shattered walls and the broken domes. Those who once traded silk and spices now traded flesh and fear. On the decks of Ottoman galleys, men and women huddled beneath rough canvas, their wrists bruised, their faces streaked with salt and tears. The smell of sweat, sea, and despair hung heavy in the air. Some prayed in Greek, others in Latin or Armenian, their words merging into one sound, the sound of a city mourning itself. Among the captives were those who had been nobles just days earlier, wives of officials, daughters of priests, sons of merchants. Their titles meant nothing now. In the eyes of the new masters, they were merely goods. The scribes who followed the soldiers recorded their numbers, not their names. 50 Greeks, strong, fit for service. 10 women, suitable for palace. That was how history began to remember them. And yet, amid the chaos, there were moments of strange mercy. Some Ottoman officers, moved by pity or superstition, spared entire families. A few allowed ransoms to be paid quietly, returning captives to their homes before the city fully burned. But for most, there was no escape. The flood of conquest had no reverse tide. Those taken east found themselves in strange new worlds. The young and beautiful women were often chosen for the Sultan's court, their fates uncertain. Some were trained to serve, others to entertain, and a rare few would rise in power names. Like Harem, once a captive, later a queen. Yet for every woman who ascended the marble stairs of Topkapi, thousands vanished into silence, living and dying in the shadows of the empire's glory. The Devshirme system, too, continued its quiet, relentless work. Christian boys, often from the Balkans, were gathered and converted to Islam. They were trained to be the empire's elite janissaries, to serve in administration. To the Ottomans, this was not cruelty, but transformation, the forging of loyalty from conquered lands. To the families left behind, it was heartbreak disguised as destiny. Letters written years later by Venetian merchants tell of mothers wandering markets in Bursa and Edo, searching faces for their lost children. Some claim to have found them grown, changed, wearing Ottoman uniforms, speaking Turkish instead of Greek. One mother fainted when her son passed her without recognition. Whether this story is true or just one of history's many tragic echoes, no one can say. By the mid-15th century, slavery had become a pillar of the Ottoman economy. Markets in Istanbul, Cairo, and Aleppo overflowed with people of every origin. Greeks, Armenians, Circassians, even Italians and Hungarians. The trade was vast, stretching across the empire's arteries like blood through veins. In the records of the Qadi, the Islamic judges who oversaw these transactions, human beings appear side by side with goods. Sold one Greek woman, age 22, fair, literate. Purchase boy, 14, good teeth, speaks Arabic. Each line a life erased and read. But the Ottoman system was not only built on cruelty, it was built on contradiction. Within its walls, slaves could sometimes rise to incredible power. Eunuchs governed palaces. Captive boys became generals. Concubines became mothers of sultans. Freedom in this world was a matter of favor, not birth. This strange duality, the empire's ability to turn captivity into hierarchy, was both its genius and its curse. It gave rise to a class of people who lived in between, neither free nor entirely enslaved, bound by loyalty, but haunted by memory, even as Constantinople transformed into a with new mosques rising where churches once stood. Echoes of the fallen empire lingered. Greek artisans were forced to rebuild the very city their fathers had died defending. Bells melted into canon metal, mosaics whitewashed beneath plaster. But beneath it all, the old world still whispered. Sailors arriving decades later still told stories of that night. The night the city screamed. They claimed you could still hear the cries of the captives in the wind blowing across the Bosporus, especially at dusk, when the sun dipped behind the minarets. Some swore the sea itself had turned red that week, refusing to carry so much sorrow without bleeding. And perhaps that's the cruelest truth about conquest: it does not end when the swords are sheathed. The victors rebuild, the vanquished remember. For generations, mothers in distant villages would whisper warnings to their children. Sleep, or the Turks will come. Fear became folklore, and folklore became history. But history is not one-sided. To the Ottomans, the fall of Constantinople was not destruction, it was destiny fulfilled. The city was reborn as the heart of Islam's greatest empire, a bridge between East and West. Mehmed II, the conqueror, envisioned not just domination, but transformation. He brought scholars, architects, and poets to his new capital. He reopened markets, restored water channels, and even allowed the Greek patriarchate to continue. Yet no act of restoration could wash away the blood that had baptized his victory. The empire was built on brilliant sand on bones. For the captives, hope flickered in strange places. Some found kindness from masters who treated them as family. Others converted, married, and became part of the very society that had once enslaved them. There were even rare tales of reunions of women who gained influence in the palace and used it to free relatives years later. Still, for every life rebuilt, thousands remained nameless, their stories buried in sand and sea. Their descendants may walk modern Istanbul's streets today, unaware that their bloodlines began in chains. And somewhere, deep in the old stones of the city, the ghosts of 1453 still linger waiting, watching, whispering of a world that vanished when faith and empire collided, because empires rise and empires fall. But the pain of the conquered never truly fades. The years that followed turned the blood and smoke of 1453 into marble and gold. Where screams once echoed, the call to prayer now rose above the city. The Hagia Sophia, once the pride of Christianity, was transformed into a mosque, its mosaics hidden under whitewash, its bells silenced forever. The skyline changed, but beneath the new domes, the memory of fire remained. For the victors, Istanbul became the jewel of the world, a city reborn under the crescent moon. For the defeated, it became a ghost. The streets that once smelled of incense and wine now carried the scent of spice and gunpowder. The Greek songs faded. Turkish words replaced them. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when the winds swept in from the Bosporus, some swore they could still hear the distant chanting of monks' voices that refused to die. In those early decades, the enslaved became invisible threads woven into the empire's tapestry. Greek builders raised Ottoman palaces. Armenian artisans carved the marble that decorated mosques. Venetian captives taught navigation, turning the empire's fleets into floating fortresses. Every brick of the new Istanbul carried the fingerprints of the conquered. Among them were women who once wept as prisoners but later ruled as queens behind veils of silk. Harem Sultan, once a captive from Ruthenia, would rise to power a century later, proving that even in chains, destiny could twist. Her story echoed those who came before, women torn from home who learned to survive in the shadows of power. But not everyone found redemption in the empire's embrace. For most, the fall of Constantinople was not a chapter of history. It was the end of a world. The children taken in the Devshirme system grew up to forget their language, their prayers, their mothers' faces. They fought bravely for a sultan who had once enslaved their people, believing that loyalty could wash away the past. And yet, deep inside, some part of them remembered. There are accounts whispered through time of Janissaries standing outside Greek villages during campaigns, hearing the lullabies their mothers once sang. For a moment their hands trembled, but orders were orders, and empires have no room for memory. Centuries passed, and the world changed. Empires rose, empires fell. But the story of 1453 remained retold by monks, merchants, travelers, and dreamers. Each added their own truth, their own pain. In Europe, it became a story of loss, the last cry of Christian Byzantium. In the Ottoman lands, it became a story of destiny, the dawn of a new age. But somewhere between those two extremes lies the human truth, a truth that does not speak in the language of conquest or faith, but of tears. Imagine the grandmother telling her grandchildren, "Once there was a city by the sea. Its walls touched the clouds. Its bells could be heard for miles, and its people believed they were safe. And then, one morning, the earth shook. The sky turned red, and everything she knew was gone." That story, carried in whispers, survived longer than any empire. History books will tell you about Mehmed the Conqueror's brilliance, his strategy, his artillery, his dream of uniting East and West. But they rarely speak of the nameless woman who died holding her child, or the boy who was taken from his father's arms to serve the very army that killed him. Those lives never made it into chronicles, yet they are the soul of this history. Even the conqueror himself was haunted by what he had done. Some accounts suggest that after the city fell silent, Mehmed rode through the ruined streets, dismounting before the shattered Hagia Sophia. He looked upon the fallen icons, the broken marble, the scattered dead, and he wept. "What a city we have given to plunder," he whispered. Whether these words are fact or legend, no one knows. But even legends carry truths that facts cannot hold. The empire that grew from that victory would become one of the most powerful in the world. It would rule for centuries, stretching from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Hungary, but its foundations were built on the ruins of those who came before. Every empire carries ghosts, and the Ottoman Empire carried millions. And yet, in the strange way that history works, the pain of one generation became the pride of another. Istanbul flourished, its markets buzzed, its scholars wrote, its architects built wonders that still stand today. The blood that had soaked its soil gave birth to beauty. That is the paradox of human civilization. We build greatness from the ashes of tragedy. Still, for those who look closely, the cracks remain. Walk through Istanbul at dawn, when the first light touches the domes, and you may feel it, that quiet heaviness in the air. The stones remember. The sea remembers, even if no one else does. 5 centuries later, archaeologists still uncover traces of that day, shards of broken glass, fragments of church bells, children's toys buried in ash. Each artifact tells the same story, that no wall, no empire, no godly power can truly protect against the greed of men. But if you listen closely, there's another message hidden within the ruins. Not of defeat, but of endurance. The people of Constantinople did not vanish. They transformed. Their blood runs in the veins of modern Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Arabs alike. The empire that once divided them now unites them through memory and lineage, because history is not made by conquerors alone. It is carried forward by those who survived. The fall of Constantinople was not just the end of Byzantium. It was the beginning of a new world, one that would shape religion, trade, art, and war for centuries to come. From that single moment of collapse, Europe and Asia would be forever intertwined. The ruthless of 1453 reached across oceans, changing how kingdoms dreamed and how empires ruled. And yet, beneath all that, it remains a human story of love lost, faith tested, and survival against impossible odds. Picture that mother again, the one from the first night. Maybe she survived. Maybe her daughter grew up under another name, in another tongue, in another faith. Maybe she became part of the empire that had once broken her world. If so, then perhaps that is history's cruelest gift, its ability to turn pain into legacy. Because every empire that rises carries within it the memory of those it conquered, and every stone laid in triumph is balanced on the bones of the forgotten. So the next time you walk through Istanbul, through Sultanahmet, past the Hagia Sophia, under the shadow of the Blue Mosque pause, for a moment, close your eyes. Listen. You may hear them, the echoes of that morning in 1453. The whispers of a city that refused to die, and when you open your eyes again, remember this. Empires fade, glory burns away, but memory endures.